Mr. Chairman, Senator Coburn, thank you again for the opportunity to testify here today. I'm pleased to join my colleagues and join the voice providing you with ammunition for the discussions ahead. Let me be clear from the outset that as an organization representing more than 350 companies doing business with the government, we take no position on the specific solutions to the current fiscal debate. We recognize and respect that funding decisions are within the purview of Congress and the administration. We do, however, have a very strong point of view with regard to the question you've posed in today's hearing. When our member company CEOs gathered just over a month ago to identify our top policy priorities for 2013, achieving budget stability emerged by far as their #1 objective. The consensus among our leaders is very simple. 4 simple words: rip off the Band-Aid. We recognize that no stakeholders will be unscathed, but we also believe that it is in the best interest of the nation and the government to finally come to grips with the fiscal challenges we face. Indeed, on virtually every level, restoring a reasonable degree of predictability and stability to federal budgeting, a return to regular order, if you will, is essential to the right functioning of federal agencies, successful program execution, and the ability of our industry to bring to the table the best and most innovative and effective solutions. Let me briefly set forth the 4 key areas in which today's lack of stability and certainty in budgeting are impacting our industry. First and most obviously, the lack of stability and predictability significantly increases the risks faced by companies serving the government. This is the most basic economic fact. And with increased risk comes necessarily increased conservatism with regard to investments in people, capabilities, and technology. When I speak of risk, I do not mean simply the risk associated whether one wins a contract or not. I'm speaking more broadly of the risk associated with whether the contract on which one is bidding will be significantly delayed or even ever awarded. There is broad agreement that procurement lead times today are stretching longer than anyone has seen in recent history, in some cases as much as 3 or more years from the submittal of bids to award decisions. I'm also speaking of whether margins, which in the government market have always been somewhat lower than the commercial environment, will be pressured lower and lower as agencies seek any and every tool at their disposal to save money, even when doing so is contrary to smart practice. We're not talking here about margins being driven down from the unreasonably high to the reasonable. We're talking about margins being driven from the reasonable to the unreasonable. In fact, an authoritative annual report recently released by Grant Thornton documents this trend very clearly. 1 year ago, 35% of the more than 100 government contractors surveyed reported margins below 5%. This year, that number has jumped to 60%, despite the fact that a substantial percentage of those firms provide very high-end, often complex solutions to the government. Needless to say, the absence of reasonable margins directly impacts a company's ability to invest in future capability, in people, or in excellence generally. I'm also speaking of a range of impacts playing out in acquisition strategy and practice. For example, across our more than 360 member companies of all sizes, there's a consensus that the government is defaulting to procuring virtually everything from the simple to the most complex on a lowest price, technically acceptable basis. There are many reasons for this, but clearly uncertainty is one of them. Under the rules, when what is known as an LPTA contract is awarded, the government must award to the lowest bidder meeting the minimum technical requirements. For a wide range of commodities, that makes eminent sense, but for the many far more complex professional and technology requirements the government has, it is both counterintuitive and counterproductive. Unfortunately, it is also dominating today's marketplace. We are facing a potential race to the bottom where companies have to do whatever they can to survive. But the depth of that race is ultimately controlled by the government customer and the behaviors and attributes it rewards and incentivizes. Rewards and incentives that are impossible in the face of uncertainty. We can also see these impacts very clearly with regard to the workforce. On the public sector side, our partners have been living with a long-term pay freeze, often increased workloads, and the difficult challenges of managing in an unstable environment. This is not to mention the potential for furloughs as a result of the sequester. All of this comes at a time when the government workforce faces daunting demographic and skills gap challenges, and when the government itself is struggling to be competitive for critical skills, particularly in the technology sphere. In the private sector, the impacts have also been acute. Over the last couple of years, thousands of jobs have been eliminated across the industry as a direct result of the budget uncertainty and related program instability. Many of the individuals who have exited those jobs have also exited the government sector altogether and are unlikely to return. Still, thousands more positions have not been filled by companies who simply cannot justify the investments required given the uncertainty in their marketplace. There is also increasing pressure in the government market to arbitrarily cap contractor employee salaries, even when such caps bear little relationship to what the broader human capital marketplace has deemed certain skills to be worth. Most of the attention is being focused on how contractor salaries compare to government salaries, rather than on the far more pertinent question of whether those salaries enable contractors to compete for the best talent with the rest of the commercial world. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, is the impact on mission. Here the message is also quite simple. The combination of uncertainty and potential funding reductions force agencies to forego or delay new initiatives or to improve performance or delay planned technology refresh and scheduled maintenance and upkeep, all of which causes long-term costs inevitably to rise and mission effectiveness to suffer. They require agencies to fund their initiatives incrementally, which is often by definition inefficient and costly. Budgetary pressures lead to reduced investments in people and technology in both industry and government, and are further exacerbated by the trends I discussed earlier: awards on the basis of lowest rather than best price, unprecedented pressures on margins, and the reduced ability of both companies and the government to hire needed skills, all of which pose a great threat to the effective and optimal execution of the government's mission. Mr. Chairman, I have much more detail in my written statement, but we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you again for the opportunity.
There being none, motion, thank you, Mr. Soloway.